This is Bishop Dillon welcoming all of you to Saturday's story. Remember, Jesus said that he spake not without a story or without a parable. And the underlying foundation of every parable or every story was that God is going to do what he said he was going to do. He will fulfill his word. Matter of fact, Numbers chapter 23 and verse 19 says, God is not a man that he should lie, nor the son of man that he should change his mind. Does he speak and not act, or promise and not fulfill? Is God going to speak and not act? If the Lord says it, there's going to be action with what God says. If he promises it, it's going to be fulfilled. And the greatest builder of faith is not what happens overseas or what happens somewhere else, or even maybe what you read in this book. But the greatest builder of faith is what happens to you as an individual, knowing that you prayed it, you asked God for it, and the Lord fulfilled that promise to you as an individual. He manifested himself and proved that his word was true. That is the greatest builder of faith, because from the time that God says it to the time that it happens is a testing ground. And this is where we are. We're living in a testing ground now, because you can't have a testimony without a test. You can't have a message without a mess. So we're living in this time to where, God, are you going to answer my prayer? There are strategic times in everyone's life when you can go back and you can mark that place to where God performed miracles for you. He fulfilled promises for you. And today, I have a story. It's Saturday's story, but it's a true story. It is a story of a friend who taught college at the Bible College at Jackson College of Ministries. Brother Randy Blizzard taught college there and received a burden to go start a church in Las Vegas, Nevada. I committed to sponsor and support that church, and for several years I did so. During this time, Brother Blizzard would call and he asked, why don't you bring your family out for a family vacation? I said, man, to myself, Las Vegas is Sin City. That's the gambling capital of the world. I want to bring my teenage boys, my kids out there. But he kept reassuring me that it's a place for families. So one of his members worked for MGM Grand Hotel, got tremendous rates. And so we decided to take a mini vacation. It was March 1996 that we flew to Las Vegas. My boys were just teenagers. Little did we know that when we arrived there, that there was going to be a championship fight between the champion of England, Frank Bruno, and the champion of America, Mike Tyson. It was going to be called the fight of the century. This battle was going to be happening at the MGM Grand. When we walked in, there was probably 50 huge screens advertising this fight. And so here we were. We had no idea that this was going to happen. So we spent the night. The next morning at breakfast, an entourage walks in the restaurant. There's trainers and there's a manager and bodyguards, and in the midst of them, it was the champion of England, because we had been seeing the advertisement all evening. And so as they sat down, the Lord does strange things sometimes. I'm sitting there and the Lord speaks to me and said, I sent you here from Mississippi to pray for Frank Bruno, the champion from England. I said, Lord, You want me, a little preacher from Mississippi, to get up and go over there to the champion of England and tell him that I was sent here to pray for him? And the Lord said, go. Now you have to understand that sometimes when God speaks, did I not read it? You have to act. So I looked at my teenage boys and said, you want to walk with me? Of course, teenagers, you know they did. We walked to the table. Of course, when we did, the bodyguards, the manager, they all stand up. The manager said, can we help you, sir? I said, I know this is strange, but I'm a minister from Mississippi. I've never been to Las Vegas before in my life. And I came here, and sitting over there, the Lord told me that I've sent you here to pray for Frank Bruno. And the manager looked at me and said, if God is in it, He will see that it happens. I looked at him and I said, yes, sir. I promise you, God said it, and He's going to act. He promised, and He's going to fulfill that promise. So later that afternoon, a lady in his church either owned the business or managed a soul food restaurant. We went out and we were eating, just finished eating. I was looking through a picture glass window and a limousine pulls up. You guessed it. Stepping out of the limousine was the entourage and Frank Bruno. When they walked in the restaurant and Frank Bruno saw me, he took off running. He ran. The bodyguards and the manager trying to keep up with him. He ran to my table. He turned to them as he looked at me and said, Father, Father, I knew you were supposed to pray for me. He turned to the manager and said, this man was supposed to pray for me and he's going to pray for me. You work it out. The manager looked at me and said, well, I guess you were right. Can you be on the 30th floor tomorrow at 11 o'clock? I said, this is the pastor of the church here. Do you mind if I bring him? He said, you can bring him. That next day, an event took place that is a memorial in my life that I will not forget of how God will perform His word. When we went up on that elevator, they had the entire floor, the 30th floor of the MGM Grand rented. When I knocked on the door, it was the bodyguard's door. They led us down the hall. When they knocked on the door, a certain knock, Frank Bruno opened the door. When we walked in, the Lord told me, He said, I can't do what I want to do because these men doubt. They've got to go. I turned to Frank Bruno and I said, Mr. Bruno, the Lord can't do what He wants to do because these men don't believe. They got to go. He put them out on the balcony. They went out through a sliding glass door, looking back in with their eyes big, wondering what's going to happen. Then the Lord said, you can't pray for him standing up. Now he's 6'5", a huge, huge man. And I looked at him and said, sir, I'm sorry, but you've got to get on your knees before God can do what He wants to do. And I told him, I said, Mr. Bruno, God sent me here not for you to win the fight, but to win the battle. Because the battle is more important than just one little fight. When he knelt down on his knees, I'm here to tell all of you who are viewing today, something sovereign happened when we knelt down. When I laid hands on Frank Bruno, it was like a literal earthquake took place. I'm telling you that God shook that man from the top of his head to the sole of his feet. He trembled. He shook. He threw his hands up to heaven. That man began to cry out to God like I've never heard. He shook and trembled, and tears literally just flooded down his face. He jumped up and he said, you've got what my grandma had. You got what Momo had. She raised me and took me to that kind of church. And I have been looking for that for a long time. You see, who am I talking to right now? That maybe you have unfulfilled promises in your life. That maybe something that God has told you is going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And here you stand between potential and peril and wondering, is it ever going to happen? God is not a man that he should lie. When he looked at me and said that, it was like the Lord said, when I think of the unfeigned faith that was in thy mother and thy grandmother, I'm persuaded in you. And I could almost see an old grandmother, maybe already gone and dead in her grave. That old grandmother who prayed a prayer. God save my boy. Save my boy. And God bottled that prayer up and dealt with a little preacher in Mississippi and sent him all the way to Las Vegas to fulfill his word. Because you see, when God speaks, he will act. When he promises, he will fulfill. Pastor Jason Dillon, my son, called England here not long ago, tracked Frank Bruno down, and the man who was his spokesman, and Frank was there, asked him, do you remember a preacher in Las Vegas, Nevada, in the hotel room, praying for you? Frank Bruno said, I'll never forget that, because something happened to me that I've been looking for. Maybe something will happen to someone today that you've been looking for. Because remember, God is not a man that he would lie, or the Son of Man that he would change his mind. Will he speak and not act? Will he promise and not fulfill? God is going to fulfill what he promised to someone today. Because remember, God's got a story for you to tell one day. He's got a testimony for you to declare to someone that I prayed a prayer. God promised it, and I was an eyewitness to see him act and perform exactly what he said he would do. Thank you for tuning in today for Saturday Story. God bless you.